Hi Candy, hi Helen, hi Margaret. Obviously we've only got, whatever it is, half an hour, and can't really cover a huge amount in half an hour, so what I've tried to do is just find some things that I think you might find useful, which are of a practical purpose, and I'm going to look at some actual examples later on. But just let's get started a wee bit by introducing myself. Who am I? Jim Byrne. I've been interested in the web accessibility stuff for quite a long time. I set up an organisation called the Making Connections Unit in 1996, which was one of the UK's first web accessibility consultancies. And that was as a result of I used to work in a project called the Wellbeing Initiative, and I was a trainer, and it was trying to get disabled people back into work. And then I saw the web really early on and thought, this is the future. I need to ensure, not me personally, but it'd be good to ensure if at least somebody was thinking about accessibility and disabled people. So that's why the MCU was set up way back in 1996. And I can relate to the kind of education side of things because I was a lecturer in Glasgow Caledonian University from 96 to 2005, I think. And the Making Connections Unit was actually a project based in that university. In terms of accessibility, it's a very big area, and although I've been interested in it and working on it for a long time, I don't confess to know everything about it because I don't think that's really possible. Things change all the time. So there may be things in your head that as I go along, you think, but why is he not talking about this? Or why has he missed this out? Or maybe he doesn't know about that. Feel free to interrupt and actually say to me, hold on a minute, Jim, have you thought about this? Because there'll be things that you know that I don't know, and I'm always interested in learning new things. Okay. On this slide, I've just got my email address and my telephone number, and obviously I run a business, so this is a wee bit about what I do: web design, web application development, virtual learning environments. I've built a few virtual learning environments from scratch, as well as installing existing ones, mobile and tablet apps, database development. I do audits of websites, as well as do some training for web developers that are interested in web accessibility. So that's me. Let's see what we're going to do today. Well, very quick summary. I'm going to talk briefly about an approach to accessibility, which you may find useful because it doesn't take a technical approach and may make you think about things a wee bit, hopefully. Obviously, it's about WordPress, so we're going to look at how we ensure WordPress content is accessible. Look at some things we can do in practice. And then at the end, I've got some slides with some links on them, useful plugins and things. Okay. On to the next bit. So my approach to website accessibility, I'm not sure if what I'm going to say in the next 5 minutes about this is going to be a huge amount of sense or not, because there's so much in my head over the years and I've forgotten an awful lot, more than I remember, including masses of technical stuff. But I think, generally speaking, for people who manage and edit websites, most of the technical stuff is fairly useless because it's so difficult to understand. And I've taken a slightly different approach to it all. The first thing is to believe, as I do, that perfect accessibility is impossible. And I mentioned this when I was running through it to Margaret earlier on. Because one of the things that I find that I've done a lot of training in the past, people get very stressed and very worried and very kind of feel as if they have to feel guilty because their website is not perfectly accessible. So one of the things I'm saying today, which you should take away with you, is don't feel guilty about your website not being perfectly accessible, because that's impossible. Why is it impossible? Well, for example, there are something like over 600 different languages in the world. I think it's something like 640 different languages in the world, and that includes innumerable versions of sign language. There are so many impairments that we could not list them all. If we started writing them today, we'd still be writing them tomorrow. There's lots of reading ages. There's just so many variables, and that's the word, variables. Too many variables for a web designer to consider if they're thinking, I will put this accessibility thing in for every single impairment and try and catch everything. That's not possible. So given that that's not possible, how do we think about accessibility? Well, the way to think about it, or the way I think about it anyway, is that we're trying to make our websites flexible enough so that the person with their particular set of circumstances and their particular impairment can change it for their own needs. So if I am somebody with, I don't know, let me think, dyslexia, for example, and maybe I need a particular contrast on the screen, a particular font would be helpful for me. I can visit your website, and as long as you've not got in the way of me making changes, I can change the font, and I can change the colours in the background, and I can change the colours of the text. I can make the text big or make the text small. So as an end user, you've allowed me to do that. So you as a designer have got out of the way of me being able to do that. So it's all about making a website that's flexible enough that the end user can change it for their own needs. So that's my approach. It's not necessarily, although all the guidelines, all the WCAG 1, WCAG 2, etc., are all very useful resources and lots of great stuff in there. And you know, we can learn these things gradually. It's better just to have a kind of basic notion of how you're approaching it all, which is to try and make it flexible. That's why you don't set font sizes that are in pixels or in points, because if you did, people might not be able to change the sizes. That's why you don't build in the colors into the HTML, because people might not be able to change the color. So it's all about flexibility. Now, on the guidelines, I don't know what your experience is, whether you are familiar with WCAG guidelines, and British Standard, this and that and the next thing, which I've had to read, of course, being a web accessibility expert, apparently. But if you are aware of it, you may, actually, is this a question I can ask? Could people tell me? Could you tell me your experience?
Given that there's only a couple of you here, you could actually click on the talk button, or you could add some text into the text chat if you want to.
Right, okay. I can do it, yeah.
I can see that Helen might be texting something at the moment in the text chat. I'll just, okay. So I see that Helen's mentioned the British Dyslexia Association and the RNIB.
Uh-huh. Right, okay. So looking at this.
So Candy mentioned she's only got a vague knowledge of those particular guidelines, etc. And Helen has been, her references, the guidance from people like the RNIB and the BDA.
Right. Okay. Well, that's fine. Well, because that fits in with my next point, in fact, which is that from my point of view, for most people that are building websites, not building them, but managing them and editing them, the technical guidelines are not the most important thing, and they're not the easiest thing to understand. Anybody who's ever tried to understand the WCAG 2 web accessibility guidelines, and I assume that Margaret has at least at some point looked at them, they are very difficult to understand. It's obfuscation is really the word that I would add, I would use for it. I mean, I wrote some stuff earlier on. WCAG 2, it talks about things like your website should be perceivable, operable, understandable, robust, and everything should be measured using success criteria. Now, what percentage of the world understands that kind of language and would get a lot out of that? I would think a very small percentage. In fact, such a small percentage that at one point, can I click back? Oh, I'll not do it. At one point I wrote an article which was from WCAG speak to Jim speak, where I tried to interpret some of this language in language that most people would understand, because I just do not find that the technical guidelines are a useful resource for most people. So the most important thing that I would put across is actually your attitude towards making your website accessible. It's much more important, I think, that you care that your content is accessible to a wide audience than it is to be somebody who loves technical guidelines. Because if you do care, you're more likely to find somebody that's good at that kind of stuff to, you know, build your site. You're more likely to respond to somebody when they get in touch and say that there's something on your site that they find difficult to access. You're more likely to be sympathetic to this whole area. So from my point of view, I would say that the guidelines, although very important and a great resource for those who use them, it's not the most important thing for people managing sites. Now, I don't know whether that sounds like the right thing, or whether you want to argue with me, or whether you think that's a good approach. I don't know. Is that something you want to respond to? I don't know. Does that make sense? I don't know if folk can respond to that. Okay, good. Clearly, I think it's a good idea because I put it on one of my slides. Yeah. Okay, I'll assume that everybody agrees that this is quite a good thing, that it's all about your attitude. Obviously, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, you will learn all the time about what are the most important things to make your site accessible. The next point I've made is, again, I pulled this out just because I think a lot of the time people think an accessible website is one which is very text-based. And again, I don't think that's the right approach. I think that visual design is incredibly important because visual design is related to usability and it's related to accessibility for a huge chunk of your audience. If your website is not nicely designed, nicely is not the right word, but designed in a way that provides draws people into the content, helps people navigate around your pages. If your structure's not well thought out and people can't find things, clearly that's not an accessible website. So visual design is important. There are some hardline accessibility advocates who think that the websites should be text-based largely and fairly kind of unclothed, you know. But from our point of view, that's not the right approach. Visual design is incredibly important, and there's a lot we can learn from the history of design and history of how people design things, which we can apply to websites. So again, you know, that's just the way I think about it. Okay, so what we've got next? Right, WordPress. This is a webinar on WordPress accessibility. So is a WordPress site different when it comes to accessibility? And I would say largely no. Accessibility issues are exactly the same, no matter what content management system you happen to use. There are some things about WordPress which you have to be aware of, which is because it's a content management system and it's the most popular content management system in the world, people are always building things for it, and it's got this plugin architecture. So there's a huge amount of resources. And I suppose one thing to think about is when you find a plugin that's going to be useful to you, you have to ask probably the developer, have you thought about accessibility? And I do this myself because most of the plugins out there are not accessible. They haven't thought about accessibility. So that is something to do, related to WordPress. So when I have a need and there's a plugin that fits that need and they clearly haven't thought about accessibility, I usually email them and say, there's some things you could maybe, you know, have you heard of accessibility? Would you be willing to change it? A lot of the time you get a negative response because they're not really interested. But sometimes you will get a response. Sometimes they will say, I wasn't aware of that, that's a great idea. And they update the plugin and they make it accessible. So that's another plugin that other people can use that's got accessibility features. So you've done a good thing. So that's the approach I would take. The approach I wouldn't take would be to say, well, I can't use it because it's not accessible. Because generally speaking, a large chunk of the web, wouldn't be there if that was if there was such hard line on these things. If it's a useful role to play, I would say use it, and then use the notion which is built into accessibility guidelines, which is you provide the same content in a different way, if possible. So if it's not, if you can't get the features are not accessible, find another way to provide those features for those for folk that can't find that plugin accessible. So don't just say no, I'm not going to use the plugin. That to me wouldn't be the right approach. Okay. Other things about WordPress. Generally speaking, it's changing all the time, and even in the last year, it's become as an application much more accessible. And a lot of the things that accessibility plugins in the past were used to address are now baked into WordPress. So we've talked to Margaret earlier on about something which was like a lot of people just copy and paste out of Word when they're adding content. And in the past with WordPress, that was a terrible idea because it put all sorts of rubbish and crud and no structure, and it made your pages an absolute mess. But lately WordPress has actually tidied up a lot of this kind of stuff, and when you do copy and paste from Word, it's not quite as bad as it used to be. So it is changing all the time, and the core WordPress is becoming more accessible. But to go back to this slide briefly, what do I mean by accessibility? And these are things that apply to all sites. Your website should be well organized, it should be logically marked up. I don't know if that makes any sense, but a web page is a structured document. And a structured document is where the structures on the page are labeled saying what they are. So most pages have main headings, subheadings, images, lists. And how does the browser know that that's what those things are? Well, because you add labels into the code that say this is a heading, this is heading 1, this is heading 2, this is an image, this is a list, this is a list item. And that's the structure of the page. And that is essential in terms of making that page accessible for a lot of people, particularly people who use screen readers, because it's all of that stuff that they use to make sense of the page. They can summarize all the headings in the page. They can summarize all the links in the page. They can navigate through the headings by going from heading 1 to all the heading 2s to all the heading 3s. So all of the structure in the page is really important. So that's what we mean when we say logically mark up the pages. Images and other non-text elements should have appropriate labels. Sounds simple, but sometimes in practice it can be very difficult because we've got to think of the function of the image. So an example would be if it was a submit button on a forum. If it's an image, the text label should say submit. It shouldn't say this is a button. If it's an image which has got content on it, which is important, the text label should describe the content. If it's a text image which is a link which goes to another page, the text image should say what page it goes to. So you've always got to think about the label and what the function of the image is. Next one, skip links. Only this morning actually I was looking at a website and it was a guy who was testing JAWS, and he went to Amazon, which is probably one of the most popular websites in the entire web. And he discovered that Amazon on their home page has over 1,000 links. Now, I don't think if I was only having to use my keyboard to skip through the links on a site, as a lot of people who use screen readers have to do, I'd want to skip through 1,000 links on the off chance that I might find the bits that I want. So skip links are very important. Skip links are when you maybe come to a page and it says skip straight to the content on the page, or skip straight to the search form, or skip straight to the sub-navigation. So that's just another thing there. Links should make sense when read out of context. Again, very important. I'll try not to spend too much time on this because you've probably heard of this stuff before. But clearly, again, if somebody's using a screen reader and there's 1,000 links and they all say click here or more, then that's not going to be very useful. So the links should make some kind of sense. Good color contrast. Underlying links when in content areas. This is just so that people can see the links on the screen as they click through them. Makes it more, highlights where they are. And that's the same with the hover focus. If they hover over something, you want it to highlight so they can see what it is, and it helps quite a lot of people. Maybe somebody with dyslexia would find that helpful. Okay, so these are just general stuff, and this applies to any web page. And if you were to search on Google for information about web accessibility, there's millions of stuff. Much more than these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points that I've put on here. So the point really making is that all WordPress pages are really the same as any other web page, and it's the same issues to try and make them accessible. Okay. I put this in this morning. I was thinking about it. In order to find the previous list kind of useful, there's some web accessibility toolbars that you can add to your browser, and you can do some very basic testing. And I use these myself. So if you're not aware of them, you should download them and install them into your browser. They allow you to do things like show me the structure of the page, show me all the images without labels, show me the text for the labels of all the images, turn all the images off, turn the style sheet off. It allows you to do all these things, which shows you the structure of the page and shows you how accessible the page is to somebody using a screen reader, or to the browser itself, or multiple browsers. Because if the thing's not designed using standard markup, it might not work in all browsers. So you can check the markup. So these things are worth checking out. The one for IE is this Pacello group do it. The one for Firefox, can't remember who does it, but you find them, even if you don't get these URLs down, just search for Firefox Accessibility Extension or Web Accessibility Toolbar, or there's a whole page worth of these toolbars at this link here, which is wat-c.org. Thought I'd put that in, it might be kind of useful to you. Okay. Stuff about WordPress. If you are managing your site in WordPress, there's not a lot you can do as a manager if your templates are not accessible or the theme that you're using is not accessible. So that's just a point I'm making here, that you have to make sure whoever designs your site is aware of accessibility and will provide you with templates that you don't have to worry about the accessibility of them. So that's clearly something for all content management systems. Next thing, if you can make the editing environment as simple as possible and help people make the pages accessible, clearly that's a good thing. And I'll come back to that. I've got some examples. And there's some plugins we can use which you can help make your site more accessible. So I'll suggest some plugins later on. And the last one, which probably doesn't get mentioned enough, is that I think that all people who manage websites should be actually trained. So it's fair enough coming along to a WordPress webinar, but if you're not the person that's actually doing the updating and you're not getting any training and you're just told to make sure that the website's accessible, that's not enough really for an organization. You've got to send that person on a training course, or at least provide them training yourself. So I mention that because it's probably the most important thing out of all these bullet points, is that the people updating the sites get a bit of training. Okay. Before I put together this set of slides, I thought it'd be useful for me to go back and just set up a website in WordPress and remind myself of the sorts of things I do right away, which impact on accessibility. So these are some of the things that I did. I turned on the permalinks so that the URLs are a bit more human friendly. I updated some of the default settings within WordPress. For example, within admin settings writing, I checked the box that said WordPress should correct invalidly nested HTML automatically. And that just helps with the validation of your pages. I installed some plugins. I installed one called MCE Advanced Toolbar, and that allows me to customize the WYSIWYG toolbar, which is probably the most important thing when people are updating pages. And again, I'm going to look at that. I installed WP Accessibility, a plugin by Joe Dolson, and I install that on every single website that I ever set up. It's a great plugin, and again, I'll have a look at that. I installed Contact Form 7 because that happens to be the contact form plugin that I use, but out of the box, it's not accessible. So there are some changes I then make to the config file, and I'll look at what those changes are. Now, obviously, there's a million things you could do, but those were just the things that I discovered yesterday when I set one up from scratch, which are impacting on accessibility. Okay, so let's click it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually switch to my dummy website that I set up yesterday and look at some of these plugins and some of these settings. Okay, so hopefully this is going to work for you. What is that I'm going to do? I'm going to click on something. This one here, application sharing. And I'm going to go to Firefox. Okay, and I'll wait a wee second while that all comes up on your screens. That work? Okay, good. Right, so I installed some plugins. Let's have a quick look at the plugins. I'm kind of assuming that you know how to install plugins. You just click Add New. You can either download them and install them from your computer, or you can search for them. I take it that's not a problem. But the one that I installed yesterday, which I install on all my sites, is one called TinyMCE Advanced. And it's a great plugin for sorting out some of the problems with the WYSIWYG. So let's have a wee look at the settings for that. TinyMCE Advanced. Now, I did this earlier on. I've shown Margaret this earlier on, and of course I've already customized it, so I should have left it at the default and then did the customization live, but I'll just tell you what I did. I got rid of quite a lot of stuff off the default toolbar because there's a lot of things on there that you don't need to use and actually would get in the way of making pages accessible. So some of the things that I removed from this, and you remove things just by dragging them, so you can just sort of click and drag, move that over there. That was a what was that I did? Was that a character map? Put that back. Okay, so some of the things I removed, I removed Justify. And what Justify does is it lines up straight edges on all the text, which happens to be one of the most inaccessible ways of reading text on a web page, is if both sides are justified. It's much easier to read a page when it's justified to the left. So taking that off just prevents folk from thinking, oh, I think I'll justify this, it looks quite nice. So get rid of it because it doesn't look nice at all. Well, it might look nice, but it's not accessible. Some of the other things I took off things like the colour. You colour the fonts. You don't want to have all sorts of colours on your pages. I took off, what else did I do? Strike through, underline, stuff like that. Things that you might use once in a blue moon, but probably not. I took off toggle toolbar because people probably don't know what it is. I might not click it, and they don't need it. I took off things like more, which again people probably don't know what it is. They won't need it. I took off indent and outdent. In fact, there's a list of these things on my slides, so it's not that you have to remember this. It's on the slides. So once you've done all these things, I disabled the editor menu, which is that menu up there, just to simplify things, because everything that's on there you can get on here. I added one, which was the formats menu. The formats menu allows you to access things like block quotes and some of the inline formatting. So we don't need this. And now we end up, once we've done all that, and another important thing, there's a wee checkbox down here. Stop removing the paragraph tags and break tags when saving and show them in the text editor. WordPress by default tends to take out all your nice paragraph tags and then insert break tags instead, so that you don't actually end up with any structured markup. You end up with just big chunks of text with breaks in them. So I'd rather control the markup and provide nice paragraph tags using my WYSIWYG. So check that one. Having done all that, let's save the changes. So it's just setting up the editor really. And now when I look at adding a new post, we'll see what we end up with. So we end up with quite a simple toolbar. We've got the important stuff to provide us with the structure markup here. We can format things here, headings or inline, bold, italic, whatever. We can add block quotes and paragraphs. We don't have any stuff that's going to mess up our content. I've left in something, this wee thing here, paste as text. Again, I mentioned this to Margaret earlier on, a lot of people copy in from Word. And in the past, that really did make a right mess of pages. And this button was much more useful back then because you could click it and you could say, right, paste in now, plain text mode. And what that would do is it would copy in from your Word and it would only copy the text. It wouldn't copy any formatting. It wouldn't copy any of the rubbish that's in the Word document. And then you could format the thing yourself. But these days, actually, WordPress is quite good. It does actually cut out a lot of the rubbish. So generally speaking, you might not need to do that. You might not have known it existed, but if you didn't, there it is. It allows you to copy text. So we've got a nice clean WYSIWYG, and we can now structure our documents. So if I had a piece of text there, I want to make it a heading, I can say make that heading 1. And I did this earlier on, and what was it Margaret said to me? I can't remember.
I asked about the importance, just why these heading structures are important. I know you made reference to it earlier with the screen readers as well.
That's right, yeah, that's right. So I was saying earlier on in this, when I was looking at the slides, we want to make structured documents, i.e. the documents themselves are kind of self-labeled. The browser knows that that's a heading because it's labeled as a heading. It knows that that's a subheading because it's labeled as a subheading. And these are the heading, these are the labels here. So if I looked at that there, it says H2, that's the label, and that says that is a heading level 2. If I put some more text in, I said highlight that, heading 3, and now it's saying that is a heading level 3. I'll put some text in. I say, right, okay, make that a paragraph, which is default anyway. It's saying to the browser, this is a paragraph here, label, make it look like a paragraph. Same with these, it's saying to the browser, this is a heading, make it look like a heading. This is a subheading, make it look like a subheading. Now that's great, the browser understands all these things. If I labeled an image as an image, it knows it to display it as an image. If I labeled a list element, which I can do, and I'll show you that. Let's make this list element. The browser knows that that's a list because it's labeled as a list, unordered list, li, list element, list. So it's got those labels in to tell it. Now, why is that important for accessibility? Well, because exactly the same thing applies to somebody using a screen reader. The screen reader reads the pages and it understands, only because you've labeled them as such, that that's a heading, that's a paragraph, that's a subheading, that's a list. And it can do lots of things with that. So if we made that a link, for example, yeah, it's not the one. Actually, I should have took text color off. Made that a link. Add link. How does the browser know that's a link? Well, because there's a wee bit of code there that says A for anchor and a reference to a page. Exactly the same thing with the screen reader. It knows it's a link, and because you've marked it up as a link, it can list all the links on the page, jump between them and say, oh, that's the one I want to go to, click on that. So it helps, all of this stuff helps with summarizing and navigation around a page for somebody using a screen reader. So structured markup is important, and when we create our pages, we should label everything using this wee pull down menu down here. Now, you may already do this, I don't know, but if you don't, then this is the way to do it, which is why it's sometimes quite a good idea, if you are copied in from Word, just to copy it in as plain text and then add the structure yourself. Okay, let's see, a couple of wee things, while I'm in here, while it's in my head, when you add images, sometimes that can be very confusing because it has to add, is there media I can add here? I don't know. Let's try it anyway. Media library. Yeah, it looks like I have to upload a file. Am I allowed to do that? I don't know. No. I'll not bother doing that. I'll just tell you about it. When you get the dialog boxes for adding images, a lot of the time you get all sorts of things like title, what's that text we call at the bottom? Like when captions, all sorts of things that you can put in. And one of the things I would say to you is, generally speaking, for accessibility, you're better not adding those things. What you want to make sure is that you always add the alt attribute. You add the label, and that label describes correctly the function of the image. Because the title attribute, for example, actually can cause problems for screen readers, and it also adds a lot of extra rubbish in there. A lot of screen readers don't know it exists because they don't see it. It's not an alternative to the alt attribute, but it also upsets some screen readers as well. And if you put captions in and you think, oh, that'll just add a bit of extra information, sometimes the alt attribute and the caption and another bit of text say the same thing, and the screen reader has to read things out more than once, which is a waste of time. So I've just mentioned that, I haven't showed you it, but I thought it was worth mentioning. So that's us done our MCE Advanced plugin, and why that's a good plugin. It helps you to change the writing environment. See, I would have taken off that text color. We don't want people changing the color of the text. I can publish that. I don't know if there's any questions about that particular plugin and the WYSIWYG, or any comments on that. Is that fine? Okay. Right, so the next plugin I was going to look at is this one, which is the Accessibility plugin, which is, let's have a look at the plugins. This WP Accessibility by this guy, Joe Dawson, who, strangely enough, I've known for a very long time, because way back in 2003, I set up an organisation called the Guild of Accessible Web Designers, which was a worldwide organisation, had about 450 people in it. And I remember Joe was one of the first members. No longer exists, actually, the Guild of Accessible Web Designers. So Joe's been around for a long time. He's a smart guy, and he's developed this WP Accessibility plugin. It's a great plugin. If I look at the accessibility settings, one of the things I was saying earlier on is that it's not a good idea to put title tags, title attributes into your images and things. So that's great, you can control that, but historically WordPress has been littered with these things. Every link has had a title attribute, and every blog post heading has a title attribute. So what this plugin does is actually strips out a lot of that rubbish. So it removes title attributes from all sorts of things. And recently, the latest versions of WordPress have actually done that themselves, so they've cut out quite a lot of things. But it still has some things here, like the category list, the tag clouds, the archive links. This plugin takes them out, and that makes the pages more accessible. Other things, I was saying earlier on about Google page, the home page had 1,000 links on it. So the importance of skip links. Well, what this plugin does is it actually adds skip links for you. And you can type in some of the ideas or some of the target, where it's to jump to in these boxes here. So you can say, oh yes, I want to enable skip links. I want them to be visible, and I want to skip straight to the content, or I want to skip straight to the navigation. And now we've got a plugin that makes that easy. So that's a great thing. Fantastic. That's some of the things there. Further down, we've got, we can actually add a wee toolbar, add accessibility toolbar with font size adjustment, contrast toggle, which if we look to this page, because this page is completely empty, this site is empty, doesn't really work, you don't really see anything. So knowing that, what I did earlier on was I set up another site. This is my wife's site. She has a website all about Glasgow West End. Because when we installed the wee plugin, we can now change the size of the text. Very handy. And we can all increase the contrast. Again, some people might find that very useful. So that plugin, that's just two tiny wee things that plugin allows you to do, which instantly makes your site more accessible and more flexible.
Can I ask you a wee question about that, Jim?
Yeah, sure.
In terms of that wee plugin, and you saw the two wee icons, the A and the kind of circle at the left-hand side.
Yeah.
How would people know? I'm just wondering about hints and tips about how people would know that was there, because it's not very.
Yeah, that's a good point actually. probably they wouldn't. I suppose is the reality of it. You know, I would imagine that on the one hand, a lot of people are using their own tools, right? So if I'm using a screen reader or if I'm using a screen magnifier, then most of these sort of wee tools and things, I would be ignoring them. I would be using my own stuff. But a lot of pages these days have got accessibility statements. Mm-hmm. So if you do have this tool, then this might, you know, and usually you want to have that as one of the first links on the page, and you would say, we're trying to make sure this page is, this site is accessible. Here are some of the things we've done. We've installed this toolbar that allows you to change the contrast and increase the text size and stuff like that, as well as a few other things. You might also say the things that you are aware of that are not accessible on the page and what you can do about it. Most accessibility pages would, you know, you'd expect people to say that. In fact, on my website, I've written some stuff about what should be in your web accessibility page. So if you are interested in that, and specifically, you can either email me and say, where is that page, Jim? Or you can do a search on Google and look for you know, jimbyrne.co.uk and then search for example accessibility page. You'll find it. So that, yeah, a good question. For a lot of people, they won't see it, and for a lot of people, these tools actually are fairly useless. I mean, I do say to folk, you know, for example, colleges, for example, get in touch with me and say, we want to purchase this tool. What do you think about it, Jim? And usually my reply is, well, you know, it's quite good for your branding. It shows that you care, and you know, there may be 1 in a million people that will use it, but generally speaking, people won't use it. You know, whatever tool that happens to be. But by using it, by installing it, by buying it, you are demonstrating that you are at least thinking about accessibility, and that's quite a good thing. You can argue with me on that one. Maybe that's not your experience. I don't know what your experience is, but that's certainly my experience. People don't use them. Does that make sense? Would you agree with that, Margaret? Is that
absolutely, absolutely?
Or do you think?
No, I think you're right. If you can add to that in your accessibility, maybe your statement or some information at the very early part of your your web page using WordPress, then people will know that that's there. Yeah. So it's a great wee tool. It's just knowing that it's there, and if you make that clear in some part of your sort of early part, so you know people at the very beginning of what they're reading can see that, then I think that then provides a useful tool.
I mean, it's not just it's not the only thing that this toolbar, you know, this plugin does. It does all sorts of really useful stuff. So that's just one of the things, and it's one of the most visual things that I can show you. So that's why I set up on that site. Okay, so I'll go back to Can I go back to my? Hold on a second. Go back to my Blackboard. Click on that. Okay. Yeah, so I've kind of covered the TinyMCE Advanced. I haven't covered this contact form. I don't know what. Oh, that's funny. It's not showing that correctly on there. Contact Form 7 is a well-used plugin, and it makes it easy to set up forms. And I use it myself. But the default sort of install makes it quite difficult to create accessible forums because it doesn't add in things like labels and in fact it strips out stuff as well, and it adds in, you know, all sorts. It puts JavaScript in occasionally without you knowing about it. So what I've found is that I've got to change the WordPress config file. Although it's not easy to see it on this, it wasn't the way I put it in. It must be just because I put it on this computer. But there's certain things you change in the config file. I mean, it kind of looks like nonsense, but basically that stops it stripping out putting in its own markup. It allows you to put your own markup in. It allows you to turn off its own default CSS. You can put your own CSS in. It turns off the JavaScript. So this is just a setting. And again, you know, that doesn't really look like something you could understand. So if you want to know more about that, just get in touch and I'll send you, you know, what it would actually look like in the config file and tell you a bit more about it. Okay. I'm going to look at briefly, did I do an example? Yeah, here's an example. So what would be an accessible feature of a form that would make it more accessible? Well, once you've turned off some of those things, You can add in your own markup. You can say, okay, your name, label, for equals your name, and then within the sort of tag that contact form sets up for you, you put in ID colon your name, and what that does is it attaches the label to the form field, and that is very useful in terms of accessibility, because a lot of the time people find it difficult to know what that form field is. What's it for? Well, this clearly states that this is that label there, your name, is attached to that form field. So that's the sort of thing you would put into your contact form 7, your kind of editing area. You would add that stuff in yourself. It doesn't put that in for you. Okay, hopefully that's a useful thing to know. Okay. I've told you about WP Accessibility plugin. Solves problems of having lots more links, link here, a lot of more links, sorry. Cuts out a lot of rubbish, removes target attributes, tab index, blah, blah, blah. You've looked at it. You can look at it in your own time. And it adds an accessibility toolbar. Okay. Okay, these are some other plugins that I just thought might be quite useful for you to know about. G-Speech is a text-to-speech solution. WP YouTube Lite, it's an accessible YouTube plugin. Zoom enables site users to resize the predefined areas on the page. ES Audio Player is an accessible audio player. Accessible external links, external text links. Now what that is a lot of people put in links that are going to external pages. They open up on a new page, and that is not necessarily accessibility good practice. So what this does is it adds an image that says opens in a new page, and adds a label to that image that says this link opens in a new page, and that can be quite useful because if I'm using a screen reader and I don't know that a new page is opened, then that can be confusing. So I can now get a wee image and I can read the label and say, oh right, that link's going to open in a new page. That's great. My read more.
Can I just ask you about that one, Jim?
Yeah.
So basically what that additional plugin would do is just provide that a person viewing that with just that wee bit of extra prompt telling them that link will move into a new page. Exactly.
I mean, the strange thing about that is when I was first talking about don't open links in new pages, that was not a convention then, way back when I was first talking about it, but it actually has become a convention that external links open up in new pages. So I can't fight it. If that is practiced, and people now know that's how these things work, then you just got to provide a bit of information, say, okay, how can I help people make that more accessible? So that's the approach I'm taking.
And just to add to that, within WordPress itself, if you add a hyperlink, there is the option, isn't there, to tick the box that says open link in a new window.
Yeah.
So you would encourage them to not to click that link. That's a really useful tip. Thank you.
That's right. Okay. I put these slides. I wasn't sure exactly how we were going to do this, but I put the slides online. I just generated them automatically as HTML, as PDFs. So that might be quite useful if you need to go back and look at these slides again. Okay. I imagine if I click to this next page, that disappears and you don't have these links. But we'll figure out a way of you seeing these.
What I'll do is this will be the recording. This will be on our website, and what we'll do is if you're able to send me the links, or actually I'll have that in your slides, Jim. We'll make sure that these links are provided as an attached document, and people can view them as well.
Okay. See the HTML version, which is generated automatically. When I tested it, it wasn't really that usable. There was no actual links that says go to the next slide. You just click in the middle of the slide and it moves to the next one. A bit strange behaviour, but that was the way it was working. Just to warn you, you might be a bit confused by that. I was. Okay. So that's it. That's us covered what very short amount of time. Not an awful lot I could cover really, but hopefully there was something there that you found useful. If you've got any questions, I'm now open to answer them.